Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody. Welcome. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome you here to Macquarie University, and especially is exciting because as science lovers, this is our week to shine. It's our week of the year that we get to go absolutely nuts. It's National Science Week, so a great reason to celebrate and enjoy all the amazing things that science does and does for us, and is just fantastic pastime. So welcome and thank you for joining us here at Macquarie University. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you here, and that also means you are welcome back. So, and as I say, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, you're welcome at Macquarie. And just as I welcome you, I'd like to now just play a short video for you that is a welcome from the Indigenous and traditional owners of the lands on which we're on, which are the Wallamadigal clan of the Darug Nation. So I'll just play that video, if I may.
Welcome. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Macquarie University land, the Wallamadigal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We welcome people of all nations and all faiths. Kwai Bidja, Jamna Payala Janawi. Come here, we speak together. We have 60,000 years of archaeological evidence of Aboriginal habitation at Lake Mungo and 20,000 years in Ryde. We have great antiquity. Today, hundreds of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people graduate from Macquarie University. The Darug Nation had famous leaders such as Chief Yarramundi, Naraginji, Colby and Maria Locke. Many of the descendants of these Darug people live today amongst you. We celebrate with you our ongoing attachment and custodianship of this country. We celebrate the achievements of Macquarie University.
Hello, everyone.
So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here today to the latest of our Discover lecture series hosted by the Faculty of Science and Engineering here at Macquarie. And it's an even greater pleasure to introduce to you my colleague and friend, distinguished Professor Michelle Leishman. So Michelle has been at Macquarie for a few years now. She began her early research here as a student, and she was looking at the size of seeds in plants and what that means for their ability to survive, what they look like when they grow up, and how that reflects their lifestyle and ecology. Since then, she has embarked on research all over the place with an amazing international network of collaborators. She's worked on things in Antarctica, on all over the world. And she is an absolute leader in her field of understanding now of how climate change and how urban ecosystems can become livable and will be into the future. Aside from being just an absolute superstar in research, Michelle has been a fantastic leader in the university and has contributed to a huge number of programs to support young researchers. And as we're in National Science Week, it's important to acknowledge how we can nurture and grow the science leaders of tomorrow. So Michelle has played an amazing hand in the life of the university beyond just her amazing contributions to research and her field. And in addition to, I guess, not just being an outstanding researcher, but Michelle is a busy lady. This year, she was just telling me she has travelled across Europe to 8 different countries, involved in her research, working with different collaborators around the world. She has done a trip to the Simpson Desert and back, and she is just in the middle of her son's wedding festival. So she is a lady who is always on the move, always on the go, and I'm very, very pleased to hand over the microphone to her to talk about towards nature-rich, livable cities of the future. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. Can you hear me okay? Yep, cool. I'm going to apologise now that I sound like I have a peg on my nose. That's because I've been in bed for the last week with a cold. Today's the first day I've come out of the house, so I apologise that I sound a bit weird. So thank you all for coming out on a wintry evening and coming out to hear about nature-rich cities. So Science Week, like Grant said, Science Week is fun. We get to talk to people about, we get to come out, talk to people, whole range of different members of the community about what we do, try and excite the younger generation to follow in our footsteps and tackle all the big global problems that's what we like doing, that's what gets us out of bed in the morning. So welcome, thank you very much. I also would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Wallumattagal people of the Darug Nation and who have been the traditional custodians of this land for thousands of years, and pay my respects as well. And note that I'm going to talk about cities, and cities we often don't think about the importance of Indigenous led science in cities so much, but absolutely we are on Aboriginal land, always has, always will be, and more and more the work that we do is in collaboration with our Indigenous friends. Okay, so let's get going then. So the world that we live in is becoming increasingly urban. Our population at the moment, the global population, about 60% of the global population live in a city or an urban area. And our population is expected to be nearly 10 billion by 2050, by which time 2 out of 3 of us on the planet will live in a city or an urban area. So cities are important. In Australia, we don't think of ourselves as being really urban people. We think of ourselves as being cool, outback, out in the country people. Absolutely not. Nearly 87% of us live in a city. So we punch well above our weight in terms of global urbanisation. And cities really matter. They take up a very small proportion of the globe's surface. The land area is less than 2%, but they are kind of like the engine room in terms of global energy use, 78%, greenhouse gas emissions, 60%, and about 70% of global waste is generated in cities. Come in, come and sit wherever you like. Don't worry about it, just come in. So our urban areas and our cities are really critical places for the transformation that we have to make in this world to combat and adapt to climate change. But there are all sorts of challenges with living in a city. We have congestion, we have air pollution, we have urban heat, we have increasing the impact of climate change, flooding, urban extreme heat. These are particularly flooding and extreme heat are things that we are already experiencing in our lifetimes. And it turns out that cities are not particularly good for our health. So air pollution results in a whole lot of problems for us health-wise, asthma, allergies, all sorts of things. Even noise pollution and light pollution can have a significant impact on our health as humans. The altered microbial composition, there's a whole lot of different components of cities that make it not a great place for our health. And one of the things that we particularly learnt during COVID was that that urban green space and connection to nature was incredibly important for our mental health and well-being. So cities are challenging places for us health-wise. They're also challenging places for biodiversity. So this is Sao Paulo in Brazil, mixture of high and low density living, pretty tricky for biodiversity to live in a place like this. Very challenging environment. And when we look around globally and we look into the future, by 2030, about 3 times as much land as compared to 2000 we're taking up in key biodiversity hotspots. So those areas on the planet that are super important for biodiversity, many of them will be encroached upon as we increase urbanisation. And even in Sydney, we see that playing out here. So here on the Cumberland Plain, In western parts of Sydney, where we have green areas that are being developed, we see this competition between green space and urbanisation and development for houses that people need. So, all of these challenges, when we look around the world, not just in cities but globally, we see that there's lots and lots of interest in tackling these big things, the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis. You'll see talk about that in the media all over the place. And so what we're seeing is this kind of shift to thinking about in a more sustainable way, how we can run ourselves as communities. We look at the Sustainable Development Goals. There are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we see increasing interest in taking up and implementing those Sustainable Development Goals. And one of them is about cities. Number 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. And it specifically has about the importance of open green space for people's mental health and well-being. But we also see just the importance of nature, our impact on nature being taken up by business, and the understanding that working sustainably is critical for us to continue to progress as humans. So there's all sorts of business things that have shifted to the way we think towards thinking towards how can we solve these problems using what are called nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions, the purpose of them is to give benefit for all of those societal challenges, climate change, loss of biodiversity, pollution, and so on, and to deliver those benefits for human well-being, but also for biodiversity. So, nature-based solutions in cities, what does that look like? Things that we need, nature-based solutions to mitigate climate change and help us to adapt to climate change, to mitigate and help us to cope with stormwater and floods, with air pollution, and also to look after our animals, our biodiversity, and plants and animals in biodiversity, and human health and well-being. Okay, so one of the main nature-based solutions that we talk about in cities is green space or urban forests. Sometimes we call it urban forest, but I think green space, urban green space is a more generic term. So this is a figure that I took from a very standard business magazine. It's actually called the Business Standard. And I choose this one to use because this is not published in an environmental magazine or a scientific publication. This is published in a business paper. And the paper is about what are the benefits of urban green space. So, and it gives us the sense that understanding the importance of urban green space is, it's coming into the business world, that part of business has to be thinking about the impacts that we have on the environment. So what do they say are the benefits of urban green space? Well, there's a whole bunch of them. There are the sort of co-benefits that we talk about, like how urban green space helps us to manage water, like urban stormwater, helps us to cope with air pollution by trees filtering out fine particle pollutants, and also the cooling benefit that they provide. But also, obviously, important for biodiversity, providing habitat, helping our health, obesity levels, reducing rates of cardiac disease, strokes and asthma, reducing stress, leading to anxiety and depression. And of course, one of the favourite things for Sydney-siders is the uplift in property values. If you live close to urban green space, there's a 10 to 20% increase in many areas in your property value. So lots and lots of benefits of urban green space. So what do we mean by urban green space? So, of course, we mean remnant native vegetation. In Sydney, we're extremely lucky that we're surrounded by national park to the north, south, and to the west. We have beautiful pockets of remnant vegetation right throughout the metropolitan area on the sandstone and on the shale soils of the Cumberland Plain. But also it means all of these sorts of things: urban green space, street trees, street verges, residential gardens, parklands, cemeteries, golf courses, rain gardens, all sorts of things, and increasingly green roofs and green walls, something that we are beginning to see a lot more of in our cities. And when we look to see how much biodiversity do they support? Well, we can look at things like big data. So increasingly around the world, people who manage urban green space, like local councils, are putting together the data into inventories. So we collated the data from lots and lots of cities that have tree inventories, so they know all of their trees, where they are, they're all GPSed and everything. And we collated this into a data set. So there's more than 470 cities, 4,734 species in the data set, and that represents about 8% of the known global flora. It represents more than 1,200 genera, 175 families, so very diverse in this, just in our cities, what our street trees are. And it even includes species that are extinct in the wild, so they're no longer out there. They're only found in cities, critically endangered and vulnerable species. That's just plants, as street trees. When we look at Australia's threatened species, so those species that are listed by government as being threatened with extinction, about a third of them actually occur in cities. So we have to manage, we care about the biodiversity crisis, we have to remember our cities as well as our non-urban regional areas. And some of those species, so I put two in the two bottom left ones, so occur here in Sydney. So the one on the left is Apacris purpurescens variety purpurescens. It's an endangered species. We've got it here on campus in one of our little remnant vegetation patches. The other one's Grabilia calei. It occurs on the sandstone in the northern parts of Sydney, and also an endangered species. You know, so we have endangered species within our little green spaces, within major metropolitan places like Sydney. Now, I'm a plant ecologist, so I'm a bit obsessed about plants, but just to show you that I'm embracing of all sorts of diversity, I'm going to show you some pictures of animals as well, because I know apparently people really like animals too. And I do too. So, these are some of my favourites that live amongst us here in Sydney. Powerful owls, wingspan, 1.4 metres. That is the largest owl in Australia. Very impressive. If you see a powerful owl, I can hear them when I'm lying in bed at night, because they're just here in the Langco Valley. We've got a couple of breeding pairs, and if you see them, they are spookily big. All sorts of critters, flying foxes, critically endangered green and golden bell frogs that apparently like to live in very strange urban places like tips and dumps and things, which is pretty funny, really. Amazing bird life, like amazing parrots and things. Long-nosed bandicoots, they dig up the holes in my garden. Reptiles, blue-tongued lizards, diamond pythons, invertebrates are pollinators. There's a blue-banded bee, most popular voted insect 2024 with new blue-banded bees. And then crowd favourites, bush turkeys, bin chickens, you know, who doesn't love them? And they live amongst us and they might give our lives joy, right? So, super important. So, there's lots and lots of interest in how can we bring biodiversity back into our cities? How can we use our nature-based solutions and kind of turbocharge them by having biodiversity? And so there's all these publications that are now coming out. These are all government publications, one from University of Melbourne, Government Architect and so on, all packed full of ideas about how we can bring biodiversity into our cities and make them nature rich. Biodiversity sensitive urban design, pollinator gardens, woody meadows, things like that. And that's the sort of research that we do here at Macquarie, is to try to understand, well, do these ideas actually work? How can we design them best to make sure that we're bringing nature back to support as much biodiversity as possible? But the problems are that our cities are changing around us. So our cities are already hot because of the urban heat island. So we already have our cities trapping heat and absorbing heat, and so they're already hot environments. And on top of that, we're adding climate change. So here's the graph on the left. I hope that graphs like this and figures like this are becoming very familiar to you now, especially the school students amongst you. So the picture on the left is from the Bureau of Meteorology. That shows sea surface temperature, and the Australian surface air temperature is the orange one. you can see them going up and up since records began, which is 1910 here in Australia. So our climate has warmed an average of just over 1.5 degrees since records began. If you look on the right-hand side, that's representing rainfall. You can see that we have a drying continent, particularly in the southwest and the southeast corners, and that, of course, is where our cities are: Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, maybe a bit of Hobart, Brisbane as well. So it's getting hotter and it's getting drier in our cities. And so we have to take that into account when we're designing urban green space for whatever purpose we're designing it. Now, that was average temperatures, but you will know, those amongst you who think about normally distributed graphs, like the one at the top, that you can get a very small shift to the right of your normal distribution, showing you an increase in the mean, but that can play out to give you increases in the extremes. So if we increase mean to average temperatures just a little bit, we can get those very extreme hot days coming out. And that's what we see, that our heat waves in our cities are getting hotter, they're lasting longer, and they happen more often. And so we see things like this. This is a snap shot from, one of the weather apps or news flash or something. Heat waves in Western Sydney's temperatures are in the low 40s, pretty typically in our summers. And that doesn't play out evenly. So it doesn't play out evenly across the urban areas. In Western Sydney, they cop more of the heat than they do in the east. And that's the kind of some of the typical developments that we see in greenfield sites in Western Sydney. And we're seeing that plays out when we look at hospital admissions and mortality rates, that we get heat-related mortality up to 3 times more in Penrith when we have these heatwave conditions than we do at Observatory Hill in the east. So managing our green space for those benefits of cooling, as well as the benefits of biodiversity, is critically important for our cities into the future. Now we know for a nature-based solution, urban green space, surely this is a no-brainer. It's a bit cooler where you've got more green. And we can use, we've looked at photographs like this. So this is an aerial image of Parramatta and the matching heat map on the right-hand side. So we've used images like this for a long time to understand how the more green space you have, you get localised cooling in those areas. But we wanted to know, is all green gives you the same effect? So what we did was we worked with people in Adelaide. Adelaide gets very, very hot in the summer. They get extreme temperatures frequently, and we waited for one of those extreme temperatures across the summer and had an aircraft all fitted out, that little aircraft there, with infrared and thermal imaging cameras, and flew over the city to map it during those heat waves. And what we found was, when we looked at the land, different sorts of land types in terms of, and their temperatures, was that vegetation definitely did cool the land surface. Land surface temperatures were cooled by up to 6 degrees on those really extreme heat days. But the type of vegetation mattered. So when we looked at the difference between grass cover and canopy cover, there was a big difference. So grass cover gave us about 3 degrees of cooling, but tree canopy cover gave us up to 6 degrees of cooling. So it went from about 40 degrees to 34 degrees. That's a big difference, 6 degrees of cooling, right? So green's important, the type of green's important, also the spatial configuration and so on of where that green is super important. One of the other things to note about this study that we did was that we think about greens, often if we think about green space and we think, well, this is a government thing, it's the street trees and it's parks and things that's for someone else to manage. Actually, our own residential gardens are really important too. So 20% of the land area was residential gardens, but it was 40% of the tree cover. So what we do in our gardens contributes more widely to the community and the neighbourhood. So most recently, governments have been collecting this sort of information more keenly, with lots more energy. So this is New South Wales government data. You can download this off the web. Anyone can download this. It is was produced. They did LiDAR work where they flew across the Greater Sydney metropolitan region, mapping tree canopy, overlaying this with demographic data, and then they can calculate things like the heat vulnerability of different parts of the city, and that enables them to go, where are the hotspots, where are the opportunities to plant, where can we make improvements so that we can improve people's lives who live in hot cities. So, because of this, we have urban greening for heat management, all sorts of strategies that come out from government, whether it's about managing it at schools or managing it in streets and neighbourhoods. And around the world, we see urban forest strategies and targets being developed. So that happens right from the city level, so local council level, like Greater Sydney. There's a couple of other ones there at the state level, like ACT. There's one international ones, Vancouver, London. In Europe, which is where Grant said that I've been poncing around, having a lovely time for a couple of months, visiting all these urban green research labs. They're crazy about what they call the 330-300 rule, which is people beginning to talk about here, which is that you should be able to see from your window 3 trees, that it is less than 300 metres to the nearest open green space, and that your neighbourhood has at least 30% tree cover. Really easy to remember, 300, 30. 330, 300, not so easy to remember. 330, 300, sorry about that. This is my head full of fog. All right, and even Singapore, the whole nation has this Trees Singapore national level strategy about greening, which is important for them for their water management, but it was also made Singapore a destination, a tourist destination, because it's a beautiful green city now. All right. So we have these government strategies. It comes out in programs like the 5 Million Trees program, where the targets are, so we currently have about 23% of our city has green canopy cover. The target is to have 40%. Where are we going to put that, right? Where is the land where we can increase our canopy extent that much? And so we spend, that's what urban planners do, is spend time pulling that data together and working out where is the best place to put those trees to increase that canopy cover to deliver those benefits. Adelaide is trying to get from 17% to 30%. There's strategies like this all over the place. But the urban green spaces are under pressure. So that's from urbanisation. As we develop greenfield sites, like that one up there that's in Western Sydney, and even our trees are under pressure in places where they already occur because of the competition that they have with infrastructure, power lines, street pavements, water pipes, and so on. The other pressure that our urban green spaces have is from infill development, and that's what our state government is talking about at the moment, of course, and we have this constant conversations about housing density and the need for more houses, and one of them is to densify. So when I grew up, this is not where I grew up, but this is very, kind of the same idea. And these two images are of the same place, right? The same plots in a city. So when I grew up, it was very typical, the one on the left. Relatively modest house, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, big backyard, big front yard. Now our houses are much bigger. Our gardens have a pool, and often they have paved surfaces and so on. So we have much less room for our green space and for our trees. And with climate change and a warming and a drying climate, some of our species are really feeling the heat. So species like this plane tree here, very commonly planted around cities all around the world, beginning to feel the heat in many places. Even a very tough native species like that Banksia serrata there, it's a very tough native sclerophylla species, not coping at all with that heat in that urban environment. And this is what happens. So this is a thermal image of leaves. This is taken when the temperature was just over 40 degrees, the air temperature, but the leaf temperatures are much warmer. So the leaf temperatures are getting to about 50 degrees, and so that's at the level where they're causing cell death. And so you see the scorching on those leaves, and that's why we see the damage to the foliage. Now, how many of you remember that day on the 4th of January 2020 when it got to 48.9 degrees in Penrith? Many people are nodding. It was a pretty shocking day. It was actually the hottest place on the planet on that day was in Western Sydney at Penrith, recorded at Penrith. So remember that we'd had a long time of dry. So the graph on the bottom is rainfall. So it didn't rain from, this is from the 1st of December. So we had weeks and weeks and weeks without rain. And then we had a series of hot days. So the more orange it is, the hotter it is. So these are, yellow is 30 to 35, orange was 35 to 40, and if it's red, it was over 40 degrees. And then we peaked at that on the 4th of January at 48.9. So super dry, extreme heat. So we wanted to see, well, what has actually happened to our trees? What's happened to our street trees when we subject them to these sorts of temperatures? So we did some what we call drive-by ecology, where it was still hot, so we got in our air-conditioned cars and drove around and looked to see what was going on. And we could do this because local councils have tree inventories. They know where every single tree is. They're all GPSed and recorded, and there's information about them, what species they are, when they were planted, and all that sort of stuff, which makes an ecologist's life much easier. And so we drove around and did visual assessments of about 5,500 trees, which in Penrith, which was about 90 kilometres of road, and we assessed them into these 4 different categories of visual damage. Undamaged through to defoliated. Nice and comfortable in our air-conditioned vehicle. And what we saw was that about 10% of the street trees were damaged, had experienced some sort of canopy damage, and the graph is showing you like the top about 20 species. So we recorded many more than 20 species, but these are the top ones that are showing damage, ranked by their damage score. Now you may or may not be able to read the species there, but most of them are exotic species and deciduous species, right? So they're things like Kauri pine and magnolias and aces and things like that, London plane tree at the top. So there are a few native species there, but things like Tristaniopsis, that's a water type species, and Acamina, also a rainforest understory species. So our native species are not getting knocked around nearly as much as those exotic species are. And when we looked at all of the damage, we went, well, how many of them are undamaged? It was about 80% of the exotic trees were undamaged compared to 97% of the native trees being undamaged. So which species we use and plant really matters as climate change warms up and heats us up a bit more. And we can calculate how much it would cost for Penrith Council. So this is only a small part of the council area, not the whole part. This was one extreme event. We calculated, well, if you replace them with small trees or you replace them with big trees, so that's the high cost versus the low cost scenario, it's costing them nearly $600,000 or $800,000 for the high cost one. So that's a lot of money every time we have an extreme event to have to fork out to replace those trees. And those trees are you're not getting instant canopy back again, right? So it's important that we have the right trees. And we can look into the future. That's what's already happening. What happens when we look into the future? We can use approaches, what we call bioclimatic modelling, where we build the climate envelope of species based on where they occur. And we pull together all that climate data and we model what their area of climate suitability is, and we compare it with now compared to into the future. And what we found was that for about 170 something species that we looked at, which are used for urban street tree planting, that climatically suitable habitat in our urban areas will decline for nearly 3/4 of those species. So into the future, many of our urban street trees will be in trouble. Now, if you have ever studied any ecology, you will know that one of the principles is that diversity means resilience, and we actually use that in lots of parts of our lives, that diversity gives you resilience. So we wanted to know, well, with things coming, climate change happening, how diverse is our urban forest? Is that giving us, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. Is that giving us some resilience? So again, all these local councils have all of these tree inventories. We could compile them all together and add them all together into a big data set, which gave us about a bit over 1 million trees and 1,200 and something species, which seems like a lot. It's super, super diverse, 1,200 species. But the word cloud shows you what that actually looks like. So you know how a word cloud works, and the bigger the writing is, the more abundant that is within the data set. And so just a few species really pop out. It doesn't matter what those species are in particular, but the point of it is that there are about 30 species across all of Australian cities and urban regions that are used all the time. Which makes sense, everybody knows they're kind of robust, they're really easy to buy, really easy to plant and so on. But we rely on pretty much those 30 species that take up more than 50% of our urban forest. And so it's pretty clear that we need to increase our diversity if we want to make ourselves more resilient. So we talked to lots of people before we started one big piece of research work to go, all right, if you're planning urban green space or managing urban green space, what do you need to know to make it resilient for the future so that it will deliver those co-benefits of cooling and stormwater management, habitat for biodiversity and so on? What do you need to know to choose the right species? And what should we do? And the answers were, well, we know that we need to increase diversity and we want to choose species that are tolerant of heat and tolerant of low water availability and potentially tolerant of all sorts of pests and pathogens, especially with climate change. But we don't know how to do it. We don't have the evidence. We don't have the systems and the processes in place to enable us to do it. So we fixed that by building a climate-ready species selection tool. So this is the sort of thing that we like to do in science, is to work with industry, work out what their problems are, talk to them about what their problems are, and then help them solve it by delivering tools and resources. And this is an example of that. So we've built a species selection tool. So it has a couple of different components. There's about nearly 3,000 species in the tool. It's an online tool. It has information about species, so we built a big species database, and it has that bioclimatic modelling approach to enable us to understand climate suitability at different places in different times into the future. And there are the two leaders of that component of the work. We also put some species through their paces in the glasshouse. This is very labour-intensive work, so it was only a small number, about 100 species, that took us a few years to do. But we tortured them in many ways. We grew them, we subjected them to heat waves, we subjected them to drought, we subjected them to heat waves and drought. We tortured them however we could, and then we did visual assessments and measured a lot of stuff about their physiology to work out which ones were drought resistant and heat resistant. And then what we wanted to do was to know, well, when people have planted different trees and different species of plants around the place, how have they gone? Which ones have been successful in which places? But the problem is no one ever records that stuff, right? People put plants in the ground, they spend millions and millions of dollars doing this, but they don't record if it was successful or not. And so, well, we couldn't do that. And instead, we built lots of different resources to help people who manage urban green space to make sure that they were doing best practice. And we built a whole lot of best practice guides for them. And this is what it looks like. So this is the climate ready species selection tool that we call Which Plant Where. That's the landing page of the online tool. And what it does is it enables you to search. You can search by location. So you can put in a suburb or you can put in a postcode. Either works fine, and it works at the postcode level. So if you put in your postcode and you hit search, it will give you a list presented like this of species that are ranked in terms of their climatic suitability for that postcode. Then, if you want to, you could search by species. If you just cared about individual species and you wanted to know how it was going, you could do that too. When you've got your list, then you can filter out for different things. You might only be interested in trees. You might only be interested in trees that were 10 to 15 metres in height, shade tolerant, and that were deciduous. Whatever it is, you can filter out all those different things, and that will kind of winnow down the list for you. So you can use your filters. It will then give you a traffic light system of suitability. Green is good in 2030, which is pretty much now, 2050 or 2070. Yellow is marginal. If it came up as red, like in a red light traffic thing, it would have been, don't plant that for that time period. So it gives you a traffic light thing, and you can click on any of those species profiles and it gives you all the information about those species, and it also gives you the climate suitability map. So you can check for yourself against the map if you believe the traffic light stuff. If you were a natural area manager and you were going to put together a species list for the area, or you're in your garden, but this is more about landscape architects and councils and so on, you could choose at least 10 species that you're going to use and how many you're going to plant of each one. You might be putting in 10 of one acacia and 13 of some eucalypt and so on. You can put that in and it will calculate for you what the total canopy area will be, what the planting diversity is that you're going to have. It will rank it in terms of its biodiversity value, its carbon value and its shade value, okay, for that mixture of species that you've selected. So that helps urban green space managers to make the right choices. Canopy area, co-benefits, etc. And all the information about how we did it, the science behind it all, is all there so that people understand the science that underpins this plant selection guide. Okay, so the other sorts of things that we do is we do field work. We have to test. We can choose these species and come up with these species, but we want to test them. So we have long-term field trials in different places. So this is at Mount Annan at the Australian Botanic Gardens at Mount Annan. We have long-term field trials that are looking at different climate provenances, at the effectiveness of different soil amendments to help plants survive drought. This is another long-term field trial that we have, which is all instrumented, where we're looking at the use of recycled water and how that impacts soil chemistry and how that impacts plant growth. And we have instruments that are measuring all sorts of things about chemistry and microclimate and so on. So we have these really long-term field trials as well going on. Now, one of the things that we've learned, one of our takeaway things from doing these field trials is about pests and diseases. So we have been purchasing plants, like all of those ones that you can see there in the image from different nurseries, and because we were using them in botanic gardens, we had to test them for Phytophthora, which is a root rot disease. And surprisingly, a huge number, a big proportion of things that come from the nurseries are infected with Phytophthora. When you think about it, our nurseries are putting plants out into different environments, moving them from nursery to different cities, and we're basically spreading diseases through our nursery trade. So we have to be very careful with urban greening to be thinking about pests and pathogens, to be thinking about how we're spreading it, and also what that impact will be on biodiversity. The other pests and diseases we have to worry about, the picture in the middle is myrtle rust, which also came in through the nursery trade. That is problematic for many of our motaceous species like eucalypts and callistemon, bottle brushes and so on. So that also affects what species we choose. The one on the far right hand side is a very nasty little beetle that you might have read about affecting trees in Perth. So that's come in through the timber industry and it's spreads a fungus fusarium and causes tree death. And they've removed lots and lots of trees in Perth. So when we're managing urban green space, we have to think about all sorts of things, including pests and pathogens and disease. All right, so I'm just going to finish off now with just a few, just to give you a bit of an idea about some of the other sorts of things that goes on here at Macquarie that are to do with bringing nature into our cities, supporting our urban green space so it's resilient. So this is some work from Cara Threlfall, who's a senior lecturer here. So she's really crazy about bats. You can see a little bat on her left-hand shoulder there. And so she uses lots and lots of instruments and techniques to understand how bats use the environment, use urban environments to move around. Because if we're going to design urban green space and design our cities to support nature, we need to understand how wildlife uses the bits that we want to plant and create. So she monitors where they move, what sort of places they like to roost, and she uses all sorts of equipment like motion-triggered cameras and bioacoustic monitors like this. So she picks up the sounds and then she can tell what species are where. We all know about the big bats, so flying foxes. We hear them, no problem hearing them. But these acoustic sensors pick up the microbats. So we have acoustic sensors across the campus here, and from them we know that we have 6 different species of microbats that use the Macquarie campus. They fly happily up our creek, up Mars Creek, and explore and move through the campus. So that's important to understand how species use the environment and move through. This is Alex Carthes, who also is a senior lecturer here, and she's also interested in wildlife in our cities and uses lots of different types of techniques, like Cara does, again, to understand habitat and animal use of different habitats so that we can design habitat and design our cities to support our wildlife. So she uses things like terrestrial laser scanning to understand the 3D dimensions of habitat, and again, camera traps, lots of images that then need machine learning techniques to go through the thousands and thousands and thousands of images that are created, ecoacoustics as well to pick up animals that we can't see but can be heard. All sorts of clever things. And finally, the other sorts of things that we do is about habitat creation and nature repair. So that's really what we're talking about, is creating urban green space for the benefits of cooling and so on, but also creating urban green space that supports biodiversity. And it can be through things like adding nest boxes and understanding how they work, through the development of new habitat like these woody meadows down there. Alex in particular does all sorts of very interesting things with developing habitat pods and these new tree guards that are biodegradable, so we're not leaving bits of plastic out in the environment when we're doing restoration work and planting trees. And that's Anthony Waddell's picture there, and he's responsible for these little frog saunas, we call them, which are warm areas where the green and golden bell frogs are very happy to be. They're a little bit warmer and it makes them less vulnerable to the chytrid virus. So all sorts of interesting innovations and designs that we can use to make our green space good to support biodiversity. So if you're interested in this sort of research, hop onto the websites of these 2 research centres, Smart Green Cities and the Australian Harmony Centre for Ecosystem Futures. There's lots and lots of different projects up there that are about urban green space, climate change and biodiversity support. Thank you very much. I made it. Question time.
You did, you made it. Thank you very much, Michelle. That was fantastic. I have learned, I'm going to take away 2 things. Mm-hmm. Must be the rule of 6s. The 6 species of microbat on campus that I did not know about. Now, if you don't know microbats, they are very small but very, very cool, very cute. And 6 extinct species living in cities. And I never thought of cities as being a sanctuary, I guess, for otherwise extinct species, or means that we can, I guess, biobank extinct species in the wild. Now, Michelle has done an amazing job and battled through not feeling the greatest tonight, so we will be kind to her, but I would call if you do 1 or 2 questions for Michelle. Oh.
Are you going to do? Oh yeah. So Grant has microphones. Sashini also can And Lara, so Grant's going to MC and you guys are going to do the microphones. You got that? Just pull it out and flick it on.
Hello. That working? So I'm just wondering, when you were talking about the temperature differences, I'm wondering if it's an issue with temperature or water availability. Is it possible to perhaps remedy some of the impacts of increasing temperatures by maybe implementing better water management practices or maybe utilizing new technologies like desalination?
Yeah. So that question works at two different levels. So one is about how one level, and I'm not sure which one you were aiming at, is about how we can use our waterways as part of our cooling for cities, right? So we think all I've talked about today has been green spaces, but actually green and blue spaces together is important to put into the calculation. So absolutely, I mean, sometimes I cycle down into the valley, into Lanco Valley, and come down the path, and you get very close to the river and it's so much cooler, right? We know that blue spaces gives us that cooling benefit as well. So yes, we should be designing our cities absolutely with the two together. And our green spaces work better when they're wet, not soggy wet, but when the plants can have their roots in the ground and be transpiring properly. And so, yeah, if our green spaces are not well watered so that the plants are transpiring, then we don't get the cooling benefit. Cooling works from trees for two ways. It works, well, kind of three, but it's the shade effect, so it's blocking radiation, but also plants, they're transpiring. So they're bringing water up out of the soil, releasing it from their leaves, and that's effectively air conditioning for you. And so if the ground's not wet enough, if the trees are not transpiring, then you're not getting the cooling benefit apart from the shade. You're not getting the transpiration benefit. And so that's like that recycled water experiment that I showed you at the end. That's funded by Sydney Water, and what they're really interested in is how can we use recycled water to make our green spaces more functional so that they deliver the cooling benefit that we need. And so that's what we're trialling. Yeah, so far it's all working well. Isn't it, Laura? Who's the postdoc who works on it?
Thank you. It was a very good summary talk. I appreciated it. I was a bit intrigued to hear you say that every council has done an audit or some sort of review of every tree. Leaving aside how much that would cost and what they've actually done with the data, is Macquarie or these organisations, are they monitoring performance and implications, or is it just left to council to do whatever they want?
So tree inventories from councils, so there's a large, they don't all do them, but a lot of the metropolitan councils do have tree inventories now. 20 years ago, they didn't do tree inventories. The reason that they do them now is a couple of reasons. One is that the technology's made it easier and cheaper. So now it's just much easier to collate and store that sort of data. Two is that now trees are seen as an asset rather than a liability. But even if they were a liability, you still have to have them on your books. So it's a kind of an accounting thing that now the trees are in the asset class or whatever that councils need to cope with. So that's part of their inventory work. But it enables them to do much better management. Now, ideally, councils or whoever the green space manager was would have a beautiful record of all of those individual trees, and then they would be looking at them every couple of years and, keeping to do them. But that's very resource intensive. At the moment, many councils have like a one-off snapshot of tree health, but they struggle for the resources to keep them as up to date as they should be, because if they were really able to do that regularly, it would help a lot more with their tree management. But as it gets cheaper, as we do more and more stuff remotely, rather than people checking each tree, there's this kind of a shift to being able to use LiDAR, for example, and and you can use LiDAR to recognise down to the individual tree species level. For some species, you can monitor the health of those species. You can certainly see what their canopy health is when the trees are far enough apart, like street trees. So we'll just get more and more automated at doing this stuff. Did that help? Did that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I can't resist adding that even if councils have updated inventories, the initial planting needs to be done properly, because one sees so many trees that are just dumped and within a few weeks they're sort of falling over.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge,
Yeah.
both from a systems point of view and just motivation at the appropriate level point of view.
Yeah, but as I mean, that's part of the seeing trees as an asset, I think. So often when I give a talk like this, people will say, oh, but you know, my neighbour hates our tree, drops leaves, blah, blah, blah. What should I do? How do I talk to them? And say, okay, well, maybe to have a chat with your neighbour and say, I know it drops trees on your car, but you know those lorikeets that come and visit, they really like that tree. Like, just talk to them about, and if you didn't have that tree, do you think your energy cost might be higher because you're not getting shading from that tree? You have to talk, we have to kind of shift the conversation to not thinking about trees as being a pain in the neck, that, you know, they attract the bats and the bats poop on your car. Oh my God, what a terrible thing. And to think about trees as an asset, and for people in the community to understand those cooling benefits that they're providing and the stormwater and the economic benefits that they provide. You have to kind of shift that conversation. You guys all have to go out and chat to your neighbours, shift the conversation bit by bit.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions if that's okay, and then we'll run.
Just off the data for the council, is that available to everyone in an open data perspective?
Depends on the council.
Depends on the council.
If you live in Lane Cove, or if you don't live in Lane Cove and you have access to that amazing thing called the internet, you can go on and you can look in Lane Cove Council and you can see their tree inventory online. You can click on every single individual tree and it will tell you what species it is, it will tell you its economic value in terms of stormwater and carbon and cooling. It's amazing. Yeah. But most councils don't do that. But yeah. You should do that.
And a last question over here.
With the vulnerability and extinction of trees in like urban areas, is that a result of like urban growth? And if so, is like
I can't hear. Is the microphone turned on? Yep.
oh okay.
Okay,
Can you hear me
talk
now?
louder.
With the tree extinctions in urban areas and like vulnerabilities, is that a result of the growing urban population and like the urbanization in the areas, or so is like area providing a sanctuary for those species, or is it kind of like negatively affecting their growth?
I think I'm not quite getting it.
Yeah, I badly explained that.
Sorry.
When-
Have another go. I'm obviously, my head's
When the
fogged up.
cities are growing,
Yeah.
is the trees becoming vulnerable because their native environment is being taken up by the places?
Mm-hmm.
So is then their like existence in that area a good thing? Like that, obviously it's a good thing that they remain, but is the area providing a sanctuary to them, or is it like negatively affecting their population if it keeps growing?
Okay. So when we have residential development, when we have urban development, there's different things, different sorts of development that happens. One is greenfield development, where we have areas that are open space. There might be native vegetation. It could have been cleared many years ago and now be grassland, but open greens. We call that greenfield development, where it's pretty much cleared for those developments that you see the pictures of, where there's a sea of roofs and there's no space for trees. Well, we lose the trees there. Through time, in those new developments, people plant trees and you'll see the development of some canopy, but effectively there's a very dramatic decline in tree canopy there. And so we lose those populations of of trees, usually native trees there. What we see in places that are already built is the loss of individual trees. So people chop them down because they've got old and they're dropping boughs on their roofs, or they don't like them, they're blocking their views and things like that. So we see tree loss at the big scale on the outskirts of cities where we have greenfield, and then we have tree loss in the more dense areas, sort of tree by tree, that sort of death by 1,000 cuts. But we also see, you see shifts in tree canopy extent through time with the age of development, basically. So I'm not sure I answered that properly. Come up and chat to me afterwards. Okay, I could probably do one more if there's one more, but otherwise, I'm good.
You can. There's one up the back.
Thank you for the talk. It was really wonderful. I just couldn't help noticing with the urban heat, all the black roofs,
Oh, yeah.
and
This
how
is a
much
good-
contribution that would make to the urban heating. And I mean, you can plant lots of trees, but how do you mitigate that as well as a factor in that urban heating?
So this is one of these very strange things about urban planning and what goes on in Sydney. So, and it varies a bit from council to council, but it's very clear that black roofs create more heat than a light coloured roof that's got high albedo and is going to be reflective. So why do people put black roofs on their houses? This is the $1 million question. One is about aesthetics. The developers or the people, individual people building those houses like the look of them. Very short-sighted, but there you go. And actually, if you're putting photovoltaics on your roof, if the roof's too hot, you lose your efficiency of your photovoltaic cells. So people should understand that a bit better. That would help them to also have not black roofs. Sometimes it's about the council. It's about the aesthetics that some councils actually say your roof must be this colour or this colour. They won't let you have light coloured roofs. There is an argument that those very light coloured roofs create a reflective problem and, glare and all of that sort of thing. So we need better education and understanding about the importance of the colour of people's roofs. Black roofs are not a great idea in a hot city. Possibly great in Norway in the middle of winter or something, but not great in Sydney in summer.
All right, we might leave it there, but I'd please ask you to join me in thanking Michelle for a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. So you would have seen on that previous slide, sorry, Michelle is the director of the Smart Green Cities Research Centre and the Australian Harmony Centre. And please do look those up and contact us if you would like any further information. It was remiss of me not to introduce myself. I apologise. I'm Grant Hose. I'm the head of School of Natural Sciences at Macquarie. And I would like to warmly invite you to the next Discovery Lecture Series on 18th of September. It's another staff member from our fantastic school, Associate Professor Kira Westerway, who's going to speak about why we're so good at adapting while our primate relatives faced extinction. And the backstory to that is Kira works in researching in Southeast Asia, looking at hominoids and the evolution of human life and its dispersion across the planet. So it will be an absolutely fantastic talk. So please do get along. Please also register. So if you register, it allows us to tell you about any last minute changes or updates to locations and so on. So please do jump on the QR code, register and come along on the 18th of September. Also, another word from our sponsor. If you like what you've seen today and you'd like to learn more about what we do at Macquarie, it is our open day on Saturday. So please do come along. There'll be all kinds of displays and things to see, things to do, lovely people to talk to. So please do come along. As I said before, you are welcome here tonight and you are always welcome back at Macquarie. We would love to see you again. So thank you for coming and have a wonderful evening.